Story 1. The Vanishing Trail. Sarah, Liam, and their friend Ben were seasoned hikers, always chasing after the next adventure. On a crisp fall weekend, they decided to explore the remote Blackthorn Forest, a vast woodland that stretched for miles, filled with towering trees and narrow, winding paths. There was an eerie legend tied to this forest, of a trail that disappeared beneath the feet of those who walked it. Locals whispered about hikers who ventured in and never returned, but the trio dismissed these as baseless myths. The first day of hiking was uneventful. The canopy of the trees rustled softly in the breeze, and the earthy scent of pine needles filled the air. The trail was well marked, and they made camp near a small clearing by sunset. As the fire crackled, they laughed and shared stories, their flashlights flickering in the growing darkness. The next morning, however, things began to shift. As they packed up their gear, Sarah noticed something strange. The trail they had come down was gone. She pointed it out to Liam and Ben, who both stood, baffled, at the empty stretch of forest before them. There was no sign of the worn path they had carefully followed the day before. "Maybe we just camped somewhere else?" Ben suggested, but his voice lacked confidence. They decided to retrace their steps, hoping to find the trailhead. Hours passed, and yet the more they walked, the more disoriented they became. Trees that looked familiar only moments ago now seemed different, and Sarah swore she saw the same moss-covered boulder 3 times. It was as if the forest itself was shifting around them. By dusk, panic had set in. They had covered at least 10 miles, but every direction they took led them back to where they started. Exhausted and confused, they set up camp again, this time with none of the light-hearted energy from the night before. As they sat around the fire, a strange noise echoed through the trees, a soft, distant humming, like a low chant carried by the wind. The sound sent chills up Sarah's spine. Ben stood up, flashlight in hand, determined to investigate. "I'll check it out. It's probably just the wind," he said, but Sarah wasn't so sure. Minutes turned into hours, and Ben didn't return. "Ben!" Liam called out, but there was no response, only the continuous humming that now seemed closer. Sarah's heart pounded as Liam decided to look for him. She waited, clutching her flashlight, fear gripping her tighter with every passing second. Suddenly, the humming stopped, and there was silence. Dead, suffocating silence. Liam returned alone, his face pale. "There's no sign of him." They huddled together for the rest of the night, jumping at every snap of a twig, every rustle in the bushes. In the morning, Ben was still gone, and so was the trail, as though it had never existed. Sarah and Liam eventually made it out of the forest, but Ben was never found. When they told their story to the authorities, the response was grim. "You're not the first." Story 2. The Eyes in the Dark. Maya and her younger brother, Ethan, were on their annual camping trip, a tradition that had started when they were kids. This year, they had picked a spot in the heart of Maplewood Forest, a serene and peaceful location known for its picturesque views and abundant wildlife. They arrived at their campsite just before dusk and pitched their tent at the edge of a small clearing, with the trees towering high around them. The first night was quiet, almost too quiet. As they sat by the fire roasting marshmallows, Maya noticed something strange. In the distance, just beyond the ring of light cast by the flames, she thought she saw a pair of glowing eyes reflecting the fire's light. "Did you see that?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly. Ethan turned, squinting into the dark. "See what?" "I don't know. Something in the trees. Eyes, maybe." Ethan laughed it off, teasing Maya for letting her imagination run wild. But the unsettling feeling lingered. She kept glancing over her shoulder, expecting to see something lurking just out of view. The next day, they explored the nearby trails, hiking up to a beautiful overlook where they could see the expanse of the forest stretching for miles. But as they headed back to camp, Maya felt that same uneasy sensation, like they were being watched. She tried to shake it off, blaming it on the previous night's scare, but the feeling grew stronger as the sun dipped lower. That evening, as darkness enveloped the forest once more, Maya saw them again, those same glowing eyes, but this time They were closer. "Ethan," she whispered, nudging him. "Look." He turned just in time to see the eyes disappear into the trees. His expression shifted from amused to concerned. "Maybe it's just a deer or something," he suggested, but there was doubt in his voice. Hours passed, and neither of them could sleep. Every snap of a branch, every rustle of leaves sent their hearts racing. The eyes appeared again, and this time they weren't alone. There were multiple pairs circling the campsite, watching. Maya and Ethan sat, frozen in fear, clutching their flashlights and hoping the morning would come quickly. At one point, Maya swore she heard whispering, though it was too faint to make out. As the night wore on, the eyes drew nearer until they seemed to surround the tent completely. Just before dawn, the eyes vanished, and silence fell over the campsite. The siblings packed up their things hastily as soon as the first rays of sunlight peeked through the trees, and they left the forest without looking back. They never spoke of what they saw again, but the image of those glowing eyes stayed with them, a reminder of something in the forest that wasn't meant to be seen. Story 3. The Cabin That Wasn't There. Alex had been hiking for years, but this particular trail in Redwood Hollow was new to him. It was a popular area, known for its dense forests and scenic streams, but Alex had chosen a path less traveled, one that veered off the main route and into the depths of the woods. He wanted solitude, a break from the everyday grind. About 5 miles into the hike, Alex came across something unexpected, an old cabin nestled between the trees. It looked abandoned, its wooden frame weathered and cracked. The windows were dark, and the door hung slightly ajar. Curiosity got the better of him, and Alex decided to investigate. He stepped inside, the floorboards creaking beneath his boots. The air was thick with the scent of rot and mildew, and the dim light filtering through the dirty windows gave the space an eerie, otherworldly feel. There was no furniture, just a few scattered leaves and dust-covered footprints leading deeper into the cabin. Alex followed the footprints, but they ended abruptly at a blank wall. That's when he heard it, a soft, shuffling sound, like someone was moving just out of sight. His heart raced, and he turned to leave, but the door had slammed shut behind him. Panic set in. He rushed to the door, yanking it open, and stumbled outside, breathing heavily. As he turned to look back at the cabin, his blood ran cold. The cabin wasn't there anymore. The spot where it had stood was now just an empty clearing, the ground covered in fallen leaves and twigs. Alex blinked, rubbed his eyes, but the cabin had vanished, as if it had never existed. Frightened and confused, Alex ran back to the main trail, but the forest seemed different now. Darker, more oppressive. The trees seemed to close in around him, and every direction he took only led him deeper into the woods. Hours passed, and the sun began to set. Desperate, Alex climbed to a ridge, hoping to see a way out, but what he saw instead made his stomach churn. The cabin had reappeared far below, nestled between the trees, its door wide open as if waiting for him. Alex turned and ran, the sound of footsteps echoing behind him as the forest seemed to close in. He was never found. To this day, hikers claim to see a cabin in Redwood Hollow that appears and disappears without a trace, and those who get too close, they don't come back.